Left of the box. As we've been seeing more and more of recently, this type of hatred, this type of stochastic terrorism, it doesn't stay restricted to the States. It's not a phenomenon only there. It spreads. And a lot of that spreads up here into Canada because our culture is heavily influenced by what happens in the States. And vice versa, even though not as much, but a lot of our hatred gets exported down into the States where it then plants and grows and then gets re-exported back up here. It's all a cycle. And we are going to be having an election in the next year or two. And this is going to become an issue. This culture war bullshit is going to be an issue up here in Canada. From Leah, Pierre Poilievre is anti-trans and anti-choice. So Pierre Poilievre is the current leader of the Conservative Federal Party. The only freedom this guy is fighting for is the freedom of extremist views. Freedom is about protecting the human rights of all, time to speak out against right-wing extremists fanning the flames of hate and division. And that's in reply to this tweet from Kay. Trans women in Canada are under attack. The movement that began with gender diverse and trans children is now expanding to target the rights of trans adults. I call on those who believe in justice and dignity for all to push back and take a stand for what is right. And in my last live stream, I believe it was my last live stream, I mentioned that the Canadian Intelligence Services has said that we're most likely going to be seeing a spike in hate crimes towards LGBTQ plus people in the next coming year. And part of it is we have our conservative politicians like Pierre Poilievre, Danielle Smith, the Premier of New Brunswick, platforming this hatred, spreading this hatred. Danielle Smith had Tucker Carlson, went on stage with him to talk about replacement theory and other horrific things. So Pierre backs banning trans women from women's sports, change rooms, and bathrooms. Conservative leader says federal jurisdiction may limit what he can do to restrict trans women access, and that is true. The federal government can't necessarily implement, they can make things difficult, and it's usually the provinces that find the workarounds, the conservative leaders of the provinces that find ways of making place more hostile to queer folks. But he doesn't have to be successful with legislation to change the environment, to change how safe it is for people in Canada to be trans. It doesn't need to be passed. The attempt, just trying to do it, does a lot of damage, emboldens a lot of hateful, bigoted people, makes it more dangerous for trans people to exist in public. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre stepped into debate over trans rights on Wednesday, saying biological males should be banned from women's sports, change rooms, and bathrooms. Female spaces should be exclusive for females, not biological males, Poilievre said in Kitchener, Ontario. The Conservative leader made the comments after being asked if, as Prime Minister, he would introduce legislation to prevent transgender women or biological men from participating in female sports or entering female prisons and shelters. A lot of these spaces are provincially and municipally controlled, so it's unclear what reach federal legislation would have to change them, Poilievre said. But obviously female sports, female change rooms, female bathrooms should be for females, not biological males, he added. Last month, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith unveiled that sort of horrible stuff, issues with the puberty blockers. And here's Trudeau. Again, he actually speaks out on this. Trudeau says Poilievre is picking a fight with trans kids. This pronoun policy follows similar moves by New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. They're talking about the policy to out trans children to abusive families if the child is unable to get their parents' consent to even unofficially have a gender change or a name change in their schools. So even unofficially, the parent has to know. And if the child is not safe telling their parents, then it forces teachers to misgender the child. So last fall, 69% of delegates in the Conservative Party convention voted in favor of a motion that said those under the age of 18 should be prohibited from accessing life-altering medication or surgical interventions to treat gender confusion and dysphoria. But you see, they're only saying medical treatments for this specific reason. And when you do that, it's called discrimination, because they're fine if children have other life-altering medication or surgical interventions for other reasons. But for this one specific reason, suddenly they want to get in between people and their doctors. Trudeau responded to Poilievre's remarks later Wednesday, telling reporters in Edmonton that Poilievre would rather pick a fight with trans kids than deal with the real problem facing Canadians. I think Mr. Poilievre and politicians like him are choosing to attack some of the most vulnerable people in our society as a way of deflecting from the fact that they are very good at creating division and anger, Trudeau said Wednesday. But so far they have been terrible at putting forth any concrete solutions for the big problems that all Canadians are facing in their daily lives. The Prime Minister also said Poilievre has no policy solutions for issues such as housing, climate change, and childcare. And of course, it is a distraction. And some people say like, oh, the culture war doesn't matter. But I've used this analogy before. It's kind of like saying, the culture war is a distraction from the real issues. It's like saying they threw a bomb into a crowd to distract the fact that they were robbing the bank. A lot of damage is being done. People are being hurt. Lives are being ruined. Lives are being taken from this culture war. It's not a superficial issue. It's a big, important issue that needs to be addressed, but people like Poilievre are using as a way to deflect from the fact that they have no solutions for people. They have no way, they don't want to make the lives of Canadians better. There's no plan on housing. There's no plan on climate change. The only plan is to keep making their donors and the wealthy few even wealthier. That's it. So how exactly does he intend to police this? So Rachel Gilmore, another person who's wonderful to follow on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, is replying to Faye Johnstone, who tweeted this out. Pierre Poilievre has publicly voiced his support for banning transgender women from women's spaces. This is an assault on the rights of transgender women and will result in more homeless trans women and more trans people subjected to hate. This is a war on trans rights.
Female spaces should be exclusively for females, not for biological males.
And so Rachel was just commenting on this, saying, will any woman with short hair or an androgynous style be forced to undergo a genital exam? Personal liberty for me, but not for thee, I guess. This is harrowing in so many ways. And yeah, there is no real way to police this. And again, it's always the focus is on transgender women, whereas trans men are invisible. It's like they don't count in this. But it's always a misogynistic, patriarchal way of looking at things like, oh, we must protect the women, the poor, precious women, the sanctity of womanhood. We must protect that from these biological men, where trans women are overwhelmingly the targets of hate and violence. Diana had tweeted out, the more that gender difference is positioned as a threat to heteronormativity, the more that violence against trans women is legitimized. Mr. Poilievre, the threat isn't biology, it's your normalization of transphobic violence, which will lead them to harm, death, and homelessness. And yes, this goes towards what I was saying when, even though Pierre Poilievre doesn't, if he gets to be prime minister, he doesn't have the power to implement a lot of these policies that he wants seen put in place, but the damage will be done. He's making it a safer environment for bigots to attack people, to justify their actions. And this despite somebody pointing out a kid was just killed because of policies and rhetoric like this. Absolutely vile. Sherry is pointing out this is against our laws in Canada. This is so Trumping is really set to break our human rights codes so as to pacify those who would beat up their most vulnerable. Remember the first folks in Berlin to be rounded up in the 1930s were trans folks. Yes, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada does protect people far better than people get protected in the United States, but it's still, there are ways around it, and conservative leaders will find any way around laws that protect the rights of individuals if it serves their bigoted agenda. And it's something that we always have to remain vigilant of. So we are safer in Canada than we are in the United States, but we are not safe here. And it's important that we stay vigilant because things like this end up happening.
Well, a town in Alberta has voted to ban rainbow crosswalks that celebrate Pride. It passed by a slim margin in Westlock, that's north of Edmonton, after put to a town vote. CTV's Miriam Valdez-Carletti is tracking the story and joins us now with more. Miriam, good morning, and take us through this vote, what led to it, and what it means.
Well, good morning, Roger. Yes, this vote happened late last night, and there were 24 votes that ended up having this motion passed. And this is about just over 1,300 people who cast their vote. And essentially, this now means that the existing rainbow crosswalk just outside near City Hall must now be removed. And they did excuse.
What is so scary about this? Like, this is what right-wingers are terrified of. A rainbow flag. They're terrified that somehow this is going to attack them, that it's going to leap up from the ground and hurt them. This very pretty flag is somehow a danger to society.
Implement restrictions saying that only government flags can now be flown in the town. And this all came about last September when a group demanding neutrality in public spaces delivered a petition to council with signatures from 10% of the town's nearly 5,000 residents. And we also know that this happened last year in a town in southern Ontario. But essentially, leading up to this vote, the town's mayor did ask members to vote opposing this vote. He even listed out a series of videos asking people to consider, the LGBTQS plus community and saying how, having this ban might impact the community in terms of having people want to move to this town.
Yeah, because these flags are basically letting queer folks know you're welcome here, that this community supports you. That's all it does. It doesn't try to make people queer, doesn't try to make people transgender. It's just letting people know that you're safe in this community. And how dare we allow queer folks know that they're safe in a community?
Now, is this something we've seen in other cities as well, or is this a first?
Yeah, well, this isn't the first in Canada that we know of. We know that there was a town in southern Ontario, Norwich, that had this happen. And we do know that this happened with pride flags in the municipal area. And that decision was actually overruled last month, leading council to pass a motion allowing a list of pre-approved flags, including the pride flag. And we know that there is a community flag in that town where the community can kind of just gather in that one area. So there is still space for that. And so there is a possibility that this could be overturned in Westlock. We know that there has to be a petition that has to be put forward, but they will have to wait about a year for that cooling period. So because that did happen in a community in southern Ontario, there is a possibility in Westlock. And as I mentioned, this vote only happened because of 24 votes. So that really goes to show that every vote matters. Roger?
And this is why it's important to stay plugged in municipal issues, municipal elections, is so that when something like this comes up, you can gather up your friends and family and vote in a way that actually supports the queer community. But they were talking about another town where pride flags were being banned and stuff. And the reality is, it goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so there's always going to be challenges to that when they do that, which means then the city has to spend money on courts and taxpayer money and stuff like that. But the breakdown here was reporting on this, saying by a difference of 24 votes, the initiative led by TBA-affiliated organizer Benita Penderson to ban rainbow crosswalks and any flags, including Indigenous or Métis, passes in Westlock. So ballot question, do you agree that only federal, provincial, and municipal flags may be flown on flagpoles in towns of Westlock municipal property? All crosswalks in the town of Westlock must be standard white stripe pattern between two parallel white lines. The existing rainbow colored crosswalk in the town is to be removed. And you can see it's just 24 vote difference. When people attack the queer community, it's not just the queer community that gets targeted, because here it's also banning Indigenous flags, Indigenous and Métis flags and patterns and things of that sort. And this is always from the group of people that's saying, what about our freedom of speech, and all that sort of stuff. Nope, you're not allowed to express your freedom of speech. If a community feels that this is a good way to show support for the communities that are within, how dare you? Is what a lot of these people are saying. And again, it's because usually the right gets more motivated, they get more ramped up, they get more people, energized to go out and spread the word. Whereas a lot of people who agree, like, yeah, sure, there can be a rainbow flag there. They don't necessarily have that fire under them to go out and vote. So it's important when you see things like this happening in your city that you encourage people to go out and vote. And so this is in relation to this. Douglas W. Judson, our firm received this email through our contact tonight. I don't think that's its representative of Albertans or the people who live in Westlock, despite what those in my mentions might want me to believe. Nonetheless, it is disturbing how emboldened this hate has become. He is a lawyer, and I imagine that they are going to be challenging this. He was sent this message. First name, Hitler was right. Last name, ban LGBT and Jews. With a Hitler was right email account. I'm going to be censoring this as I read it. Message, stay away from my town, Westlock, with your mentally ill LGBT pride stuff. Sick people like you have pride in taking up the ass and being mentally ill freaks and are a cancer to humanity. Westlock voted against LGBT crap, so respect that and F off with a bunch of slurs. The harder you mentally ill LGBT mean slurry type words push, the harder normal people will push back and ban you from our towns, cities, and land. So the person who sent this likes to think that he's normal. And this is the hate that's being emboldened, that's being encouraged by our leaders, both in the States and here in Canada. When you have people like Pierre Poilievre, saying that trans women don't have the same rights as other women. We can dictate where they go. We can ban them from certain spaces. It just emboldens hateful, bigoted people like this. But there is some pushback happening, at least. Thanks to an amazing donor, hundreds of these lawn signs are coming to Westlock very soon. Pride can't be canceled by a vote. You'll soon see the most rainbows ever in Westlock history. And this is from a tweet from Dr. Christopher Wells. And it's a whole bunch of Pride lives here and everyone is welcome here. Pride lawn signs that will be going up all over Westlock. I do worry that some of the houses that put these up will become targets of vandalism, as has been the case in other cities, but I love the initiative. I hope to see a sea of rainbow in Westlock. That would be fantastic.